Welcome to Explainable AI, where demystifying minds is your personal journey into the heart of artificial intelligence. I'm Paul Anthony Claxton. I'm an AI venture capitalist and serial entrepreneur. After a decade of service in the U.S. Marines, I was captivated by the power of battlefield technologies and what they could do for us, which inspired me to get into the world of enterprise technology. My commitment to making a meaningful difference has ultimately led me into venture capital, where I view capital as a catalyst, a powerful tool to drive positive change. As a recognized thought leader in the industry, I regularly share my updates and my insights through various mediums, such as podcasts like this one, various media outlets that I write for, and my own personal blogs, such as Venture Capital and AI and other platforms that I write for, such as ideascale.com, one of the largest innovation platforms online in the world. You can learn more about me at my personal website, which is paulclaxton.io. And from there, I will pass it over to my co-host, Mr. Rohan Hall. Rohan?
Hey, thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. So my name is Rohan Hall, and I'm the co-host of Explainable AI. I'm a serial entrepreneur and advocate for conscious entrepreneurship. I help businesses leverage AI for efficiency and growth, and I've founded the Ninja CEO Foundation to bring AI education to underserved communities. We are launching Podcast Monster next week, which I'm super excited about, as well as Traffic Monster, which are just really cool technologies. One to help entrepreneurs to grow their business, and one that's focused on podcast and podcast hosts to leverage their podcast for scalability and growth as well. To learn more about me and to connect with me, just go to rohanhall.com. Just rohanhall.com. You can find everything about me there. And looking forward to connecting with everyone that's listening to this podcast as well.
Thanks, Rohan. Today, we're welcomed by guest Amit Pradhan. Amit, would you mind just taking a few moments to tell us about yourself and your background?
Sure, Paul, Rohan, thank you for having me. A real pleasure. My name is Amit Pradhan. I am the CEO and founder of Rainfall, the world's first self-sovereign AI platform. I also invest in the world of AI through my fund, Jet Ventures. I've been involved in the decentralized movement for over a decade now. I was co-founder and president of the Silicon Valley Blockchain Society. I sit on the Global Mobility Council of BMW, and I also sit on the board of the Norwegian Refugee Council, which is the frontier refugee agency in the world. Today, we have about 12.5 million refugees in our camps at points of most conflict. You can imagine the border of Syria, in Yemen, Afghanistan, Gaza, wherever there's conflict, an apolitical organization that can go in and help. And I mentioned both those things because my deep belief is that I invest, create, and influence in people and projects that create a net positive impact on the humans they intend to serve. And you can serve a human at $1,000 a minute, and you can serve humans in the form of impacting their lives positively, even when they're the most vulnerable, as you would imagine in the refugee camps of the organization I sit on the board of. And so my true belief is that the real power of exponential technology, frontier tech, as all of us are involved in, AI being, quote unquote, the foundational model of all of that, is so that we can use that power at scale to solve the big challenging problems. And those problems touch the lives of Susan, the mother of two, who drives an expensive BMW electric, but could also be Rashida, the mother of two, who has fled genocide in Syria and lives in one of our camps at the border of Lebanon. And that is my mission and my purpose.
I love it. That's amazing. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to co-host this podcast with Rowan is to talk with more individuals like yourself that are involved in AI and want to have ultimately want to leverage AI and want to incorporate AI into our society.
Hey, it's Rohan Hall. Hey, what if I were to tell you that there are thousands of potential clients that are looking for your specific expertise right now? The problem is they can't find you. It's not a problem with your expertise, it's a problem with your discoverability. And this is what we're working on right now at Osisha. If you'd like to learn more, just go to osisha.ai. That's OCESHA.ai to learn more, and feel free to join our early access program. We're going to be launching this in April of this year, 2026. Thank you. And now back to the program.
With a net positive impact. I love that. And I'm going to quote that, just net positive impact. That's huge, which leads into my next question. In terms of AI's role in society, we're looking more and more to AI in our society with regards to our personal and our professional lives and endeavors. How do you see AI reshaping? It's already reshaping society, but in your mind, like how has AI already reshaped society, and what are some ways or perspectives that maybe you have that it will continue to reshape AI as we go forward in the future?
In many ways, like I said earlier, like AI has become quote unquote the foundational model on which we're now building and living modern society. And if you went back about 5 years and you asked the average person what they knew about I would wager that 9 out of 10 people would quote 1 of 10 Hollywood movies where there was a relationship to AI, right? So you started with Terminator and you moved up the value chain and we got to her. And that was the relationship. And I call that Hollywood AI. It's that interpretation that a lot of the people who then end up watching the downstream impact of the movies, that's their mindset. And then with the advent of this thing called ChatGPT that everyone got excited about, because in their minds, that was the first time they could interact with AI, right? That was the first time that I could go in and put in a prompt, and lo and behold, some form of content would show up. And the average person felt like they had some sort of command and control over AI. But the reality is that AI had touched the average person's life in significant ways already, right? If you have a Facebook account or an Instagram account, the feeds that you saw were already being tailored by AI. But in that case, AI was happening to you. And so you didn't realize that AI was already an intrinsic part of your life, right? We see the stories we see not because we want to see them, but because of our demographics and behaviors creating the kind of algorithmic delivery of content to us. And we can argue, going back to that point, which I like that you repeated that piece of net positive impact. I would say that part of AI happening to us arguably is net negative impact, because a Facebook that was effectively intended to connect the world ended up actually dividing the world. And it has created more isolation than it has created inspiration. Instagram feeds have created more desire and want and lack of satisfaction with your own life. And instead of being aspirational, it has created more of a desire based culture, especially for young teens and millennials who spend as much time on Instagram as they do. But outside of this, there's AI that is happening to the world that is so incredibly positive. And you can split that down by different industries. Take AI in the medical industry, drug discovery, drug clinical trials, look at diagnostics. This is where the power of AI has shown up in ways that the average person doesn't realize, but the ability for reports to be read and diagnosed in a way that one doctor or one analyst could never do. That now you have these large AI systems parsing through and identifying potential issues that otherwise in normal diagnostic wouldn't show up, collapsing the time for drug discovery. You apply that into the world of finance, and suddenly you've got all of these robo advisors, Betterment, Wealthfront, etc., investing in terms of retail investors, giving them the same kind of benefits that a lot of people that would have required a JP Morgan or a Morgan Stanley or a Merrill Lynch wealth advisor to be able to do. So suddenly so much has started changing because of that. And you can start applying this to so many different industries. And then there is the part where it's being applied to the things that people feel deeply concerned about. And that's where the dystopian side of AI in its reality and its interpretation comes in. And that's when we get into the weaponization of AI, right? When it comes to the military and so on and so forth. And just a broad perspective, like we have been touched by AI in our lives for over a decade now. It has become far more relevant to people's lives because they can touch and feel it now, and that they can put in these prompts and get outputs and suddenly start becoming designers and so on and so forth. But it's important to highlight that when it comes to critical areas of human development like healthcare, the examples I gave you, or education, where again AI is being used to be able to create massive outreach, help people learn faster, deliver content in ways that's so customized that we couldn't, even for those who learn slower or have different needs. That's the area of AI that I think as an industry we should be highlighting more, and of course investing in more as well.
Absolutely. And I want to dig into just, you gave us almost you almost gave us a class on at a professor level economically, and just in terms of just general human activity, what's going on with AI. And I just want to ask one more question. I want to talk about one more thing before, because I want Rohan to add some commentary to everything that we've discussed so far. But you mentioned some things that brought some previous thoughts of mine from a couple to mind from a couple of days ago. Some things that I've written about, some things that I've already talked about. And the thing is that what does AI do? I think that we can't possibly know what it is until we know exactly what it does. I've previously written about, say, for example, air. Most people will associate air with oxygen, but I would say that unless you're an environmentalist, like a scientist for the environment, a lot of people probably wouldn't know that air is actually majority made up of nitrogen, not oxygen. And we know what air does, but knowing what AI or knowing what air is does not really move the needle forward for us. It's knowing what a hurricane can do or a tornado can do, and what massive amounts of air can do at highly concentrated and centralized levels, and the damage that can impose. Or knowing the good that air can do, the cooling effect, for example, that air has. So it's important for us to know what air does. And just the same, it's important for us to know what AI does. And the way, some of the things you mentioned, how it's affecting us in various ways, from healthcare to just everyday business to our personal lives, et cetera, et cetera. I really think it's important that we know the 5 W's: who, what, when, and where in terms of AI. Who's using AI? Who's it affecting? Where are we using it? Why are we using it? Et cetera, et cetera. You get it. With that being said, I think I did a poll recently in one of my writings, and I just asked 5 people, what do you think AI is? And I got, some of these people are very astute. One of them is a doctor, all the way down to a 22-year-old. And I got all varying answers. And it is these conflicting viewpoints that has us in situations where we don't know how to regulate AI, we don't know how to implement, we can't agree, right? So we're at a point of dissension, so to speak. And we need to get to a point of consensus, because sometimes we know when we're using AI. And I think you had made reference to the fact sometimes people don't know when they're using AI. And then we know of hypothetical situations where we might be using AI. And we know of those hypothetical situations where they can result in either good or bad scenarios. I think the important thing is that we implement measurements, just like you do in any sort of business scenario where you're making decisions. Does the collateral damage or the bad outweigh the good? And if it does, you don't do it, right? And I just wanted to kind of put some of those pointers out there. And then as a segue into my last question before passing it over to Rohan, in terms of AI, it's really influencing a lot of what we do in life. It's influencing human behavior and decision making, both positively and negatively. So, with that being said, what do you feel maybe are some of the key challenges so that we can successfully scale and progress AI forward so that ultimately that good outweighs the bad in all aspects?
Yeah, agreed. No, I completely concur with A, kind of your reference point. B, a good way to think about AI from the perspective of, there's two ways to think of it. One is, how it influences us, to your question, both in a positive and negative way, including in terms of how we live, behaviors, actions, right? And then there's the other piece, which is the AI in and of itself. What are the issues around it, right? And does how we build influence how AI gets built, and therefore, by that virtue, how it affects us. So it's this interesting cycle. And we can go into as much detail as we have time for and you choose to, but I'll give you a little metaphor that is an easy way to think of those two pieces. You take the current world of generative AI, right? So you take your LLMs, and that's what gave birth to the current iterations of most of these GPTs that we're looking at. And, in many ways, one piece of the issue is the outputs, right? So that's starting to come into a lot of legislative challenges. Are there copyright, trademark, work product violations in the output from a GPT? Now, I put in the prompts and it uses the training data it was trained on, and it comes back and it gives me outputs. And does that start to infringe on Sarah Silverman's IP or Scarlett Johansson? And you've seen some of these cases, right? That's an example of output. And that is a good way of thinking of, look, how is AI being built in the right way? And what does that output have in terms of implications? But to that behavioral piece, the metaphor I want to stay with is when you start thinking about the outcomes. And I remember in one of my keynotes not too long ago, about 30 days ago in Brussels, I talked about the difference between output and all of the challenges and outcomes, because that's where some of the behavioral impact comes in. And I gave this specific example and I said, the day a young teen frustrated with his or her context in conversation with a GPT gets the advice that, given your circumstances, I can understand why you feel like life is not worth living. And, it's a tough life. And that teen goes ahead and commits suicide, that we're going to start looking at outcomes. And that, to your core question, is we start looking at the impact of behavioral outcomes based on what the AI is generating. And when it comes to subtle things that don't affect the average person, it's going to be a lot of intelligent conversation debating the nuances and the impact. But once you have an outcome where someone commits suicide because of a conversation with the GPT, all the subtlety and nuance goes out the door. And you get school of public opinion as well as regulatory frameworks bearing down on you. And at that point, they're not reasonable. At that point, they're hammer, not chisel. And in many ways, by the way, to that example last week, that came, unfortunately, terrible story, but it actually happened. A teen committed suicide. The parents are suing both character AI, which created the visualization of the GPT, as well as Google Gemini, so Google, because that was the AI that was powering it. We'll see where this all goes, but my prediction is watch out for one hell of a public firestorm that's going to come as a byproduct of it. But you can apply the same thing from a positive viewpoint. So the way that we look at AI and AI behaviors in the Rainfall platform. So Rainfall essentially generates a personal intelligence model for each human being, and that intelligence model is real time. So if, for example, you drove your BMW M3 with its big engine to work one day, the next day you took your electric, and the third day you rode your bicycle, your personal intelligence model is able to capture your change in behavior, right? That's what our AI is doing. And what we're doing with that is we're actually providing that anonymously to carbon credit platforms that can actually measure what that means in carbon reduction, because obviously we can't, that's not what Rainfall is. But a carbon credits platform can measure the delta from from day one to day three. Day one was a gasoline engine car, day three was you riding a bicycle. And it acts as the counterparty for the value of that reduction, and it drops that income into your Rainfall wallet for having walked or ridden your bicycle on day three. And so basically, you can start to create incentives to change behaviors rather than create penalties and target people, which is a example of how we can start to influence positive behaviors. People start looking at their income and go, wait a minute, like every time I ride my bike or every time I walk, I'm earning more versus when I drive. And so times when I have to drive, I will, but times that I have the option, you know what? I'm going to go to the one that has the incentives. You can apply the same thing to we were talking about healthcare and positive influences of AI in healthcare. In preclinical drug trials, one of the advantages of where AI is going is that before creating a vaccine or an antibiotic or an antiviral, you can start to test without doing clinical trials on people. You can start to test based on AI patterns. And so if you're looking at where viruses and bacteria are more likely to morph and evolve, let's say in a refugee camp, and you could get data models of people's behaviors and life over there, you know that if you clinical test to those patterns, you're more likely to be testing to the patterns where new viruses and bacteria are showing up. So you can accelerate your process massively. And you can, in the Rainfall model, we actually compensate the people whose data creates those intelligence models or the models of their life that can be made available to the pharmaceutical companies, all completely anonymized. And so again, you can start to incentivize positive behavior on both sides of the equation using the very same AI that I gave the example of that outcome, which was this kid committing suicide. And how do we start addressing that, not just as a society, but as a developer society, so that we can focus on those positive outcomes and less just on, oh my God, look how cool my output is, or look at how provenance my output is so that Scarlett Johansson doesn't sue me as an LLM or a RAG or a GPT in general.
Well, a lot to break down there. One of the points that you made was about AI and research, and we know for a fact that it took, for example, to solve HIV something like 20, 30 years. And with AI, we're able to solve COVID in, I don't know, 6 or 8 months or something like that. And so we're seeing some of those value already in the healthcare system. And I suspect that we'll see more of it. But a lot of that has to do with data and privacy and sovereignty of data. Can you explain why is data privacy and data sovereignty important in the context of AI? Why does that matter? Why is that such an important thing for people to start thinking about today?
Yeah, great. I love that you brought that up, Ron. Paul, you talked initially about trying to understand what AI is in the context of air, right? And I think we tend to have this, people think of it as magic or people think of it as black magic, depending upon which side of the equation you're on the receiving end of. But at the core of AI, systems are only as good, neural nets are as good as the data they're trained on. And in many ways, if you think about modern AI, the current generation of AI that at least mainstream society has interacted with now, going back to generative AI, It's about 50 years of global North data that has been synthesized across, call it the 5 big generative AI systems that we have out there, or builders that we have out there. And that has what has trained these LLMs. And now, of course, with the evolution of the RAGs, the retrieval augmented generation, combining both LLMs with traditional information retrieval systems, right? This was something that obviously was a challenge with the pure large language models to begin with. And so when you think of that approach, that process, as much data as they have been able to ingest has allowed those systems to become smarter and be able to act in the predictive models that they do, whether it's generative or predictive AI. Where has that data come from? That data has come from 50 years of our global North activities, right? Over approximately 6 billion connected humans, certainly 3.5 billion of those being literally in the global North. And if I asked you the question, do you know how much of your data, your personal data, through your interactions with technology in general, went into the training of those systems? You would have to be either some sort of oracle or the person inside OpenAI that audited all of the data streams to ever know whether your data was in there, or not even whether, but like what of your data and how it was used, how it's stored, so on and so forth. And if we ever thought that privacy was an issue, and I'm a big privacy advocate, I've been working on privacy for about 2 decades now. 18 years ago, I started the world's first privacy-focused AI lab called Zero, and that gave birth to the AI that I mentioned earlier, that's at Rainfall. And our approach was, or our thinking was, stepping out of Hollywood's view of AI. If AI fulfills its true potential, and we could argue now that we're massively on that trajectory, one of the big victims, forget all of the other issues we have discussed, one of the big fundamental victims would be privacy. Because the way for this AI to work would be to ingest as much data as is possible across 6 billion connected humans. And so we went down that path of privacy very early. And privacy is one of those things, certainly for the three of us, we talk about it with passion and we build things with passion around it. But in the global North, largely, privacy is at best a cool conversation piece and at worst an inconvenience, right? So we'll end up with ads and promotions and what have you, and you're like, for crying out loud, leave us alone. But in many parts of the world, especially in the global South, that loss of privacy, what you said in the sanctity of your home, or what you said to a friend in a text message, or what you may have posted in a private network, can lead to persecution. There are parts of the world where that can lead to prosecution, and we have heard extreme cases of that leading to execution. So privacy, while we can take it for granted, is such a fundamental challenge. And now in the world of AI, where that data is training systems, it's becoming codified in intelligence. It's not just pure data anymore. And in that context, it becomes so utterly imperative that for all of us, 6 billion connected humans, and then another 2 billion who we all have the intention and responsibility to connect and connect in a responsible way, that privacy is going to become utterly critical. And so how AI systems are trained going forward, how data is used, how do we make sure that personally identifiable information in our data cannot be used unless we permission it, and even so should only be used when absolutely critical. And I would make the argument that 99% of the times it is not absolutely critical, that we would actually have a more responsible AI framework that wouldn't ingest our private information in the way that's being done today. And when it is done, and like concatenating your question about privacy, Rohan, is that it's still our data. And so why is it not being provenanced so that if an audit is required, you can go into an LLM or a GPT or whatever it is that the AI system is, a predictive AI model, and you can look at the data that it was trained on, not necessarily to inspect the data, but to know that it was ethically sourced, provenanced, and where applicable, because it's provenanced, it was fairly compensated back to the individuals from where it was generated. And at the core, therefore, privacy becomes such an important aspect. And I feel like it is so important that people like us who are practitioners in the space and operate with a compass that basically says, let's do this right. It's imperative for us to start making the case and creating the education and the distribution of that education for the average person who maybe doesn't understand the implications of loss of privacy and how their data is being used to train these codified systems of the future, that they start to recognize why privacy is important. And then again, going back to that earlier point, school of public opinion combined with regulatory frameworks, they come together at one point and we start having a more responsible regulatory framework and incentive framework for whether it's small startups, the future builders, or whether it is the large big tech companies, that they start changing their view on privacy and the use of data.
Paul?
Yeah. So I think you made some really interesting points to me, and I want to talk more about privacy. So a lot of AI technologies that we interact with, they don't incorporate or necessarily leverage blockchain methodology or blockchain technologies. There's several LLMs that we know of today, right? That they don't leverage blockchain technologies in the effort of increasing trust with the data that we share, the ideas, the things in our head that we share, trust and privacy. I want to talk about what your thoughts are on how maybe blockchain can help support the privacy effort. I thought you brought up a good point. In some countries, when you share certain things, you're subject to persecution, and people need to be protected, because America can't be the only country for freedom of speech. People should be able to, to share and express their opinions and things like that without fear of persecution or ridicule. So I think blockchain could maybe help. What are your thoughts there?
Absolutely. I think at a wider spectrum, decentralization of AI is an absolutely critical approach, right? We need to take the centralized models of AI and limit them to where they are very useful and relevant, being centralized models, especially in enterprises. I think when it comes to consumer tech or consumer facing AI, we need to start moving towards models that start getting decentralized, decentralizing the control, decentralizing the compute and infrastructure. And there you start seeing the usefulness of the blockchain. Obviously, I'm a big believer in putting my money and development dollars in where my mouth is. And something that we did right from the outset with Rainfall, where we basically said, none of the raw data should leave the user's control, agency. All of the compute from an AI perspective should happen on the edge and in a decentralized framework. Rainfall should have no servers so that we can't be that point of control, but also therefore the point of failure to be the guardian of people's data. I always say, show me a tyrant dictator and I'll show you a one-time freedom fighter. Show me someone's terrorist, I'll show you someone's freedom fighter. So the reality is that just being the good person, the good guy, is not good enough, right? Architecturally, structurally, you need to make sure that is never the case, that you can't inure so much power and control to just one party that becomes the absolute arbiter of some of these fundamental challenges. And therein, the blockchain becomes really powerful. So in the Rainfall example, all of our intelligence sits in a decentralized framework. That's our decentralized verse. And it's powered by blind compute. Even Rainfall doesn't see what it's computing. Data remains in the sovereignty and control of its users. And then, of course, in the Rainfall model, the economics in your back to each user. And stepping outside just of Rainfall, we built it to be like a blueprint for the industry, not just in terms of a company by itself, But the idea that we can unlock the capabilities of the blockchain to decentralize some of that value, not necessarily just storage. It may not be the most elegant place to store, but you can decentralize some of the value and the control. You can create incentives in the form of currency around that AI, again, sitting on top of that, the blockchain. And I feel like in many ways, because I do straddle both sides of the world, I was very early on in promoting the decentralized world, as well as a very early AI practitioner. My take is very simple. I think AI without decentralization, without leveraging the blockchain, isn't a sustainable future for AI. And the blockchain without the use of AI is not a sustainable future for the blockchain, right? And so now we're starting to see this beautiful interplay starting to happen of what used to be completely separate technology categories. Oh, yeah, we're a quantum infrastructure play. Oh, we're an AI company. Oh, we're a blockchain company. And somewhere along the way, that shouldn't matter. And you spoke about the 5 Ws, and I've got a very similar kind of approach to that, Paul, where if you think about current past 40 years of Silicon Valley innovation, and I don't mean Silicon Valley just as location, I mean as a state of mind, because obviously you can have that in London and New York, but the innovation centers of the world, they have been driven largely by young, talented engineers finding a what and a how. So I've got this cool platform, right? And it's an AI whatever, or it's a blockchain layer one. And this is how we built it. We've used the latest in RAG and whatever, right? And my answer to that is kudos, cool, looks awesome, wonderful t-shirt, love the hat. But who cares? Because what you really should be driven by is the why we are doing something, why we're building it, and for whom. That W and the other W is what should matter, right? The why, the purpose. This is a big challenge this industry faces, or this market faces, or this segment of humans face. And here is, who they are. And so going back to, what I mentioned earlier, whether it's Susan, the mother of two, driving an expensive electric car, or Rashida, the mother of two, looking after her two kids in a refugee camp, they're the who and everyone in between. And if we think about the who and we think about the why we need to service them, then you start realizing that the what and the how become secondary, and those interplays start to become more important, because then suddenly you're not just an AI company, you're suddenly not just a blockchain company, you're leveraging all of these things to solve those challenges. And that's when, in my opinion, it starts to get not just more interesting, but it gets way more valuable, both from a societal construct as well as a return on investment.
So we've been going through a period for the last several years that we're starting to see conversions of multiple different emerging technologies. I've been watching most of these tech for the last decade or so, including blockchain and AI and quantum computing and edge and so forth. And we're starting to see products now that are starting to actually really converge and leverage these technologies. And one of those outcomes is really what we're speaking about, which is self-sovereign ID. And the concept of self-sovereign ID is that I own my data and I can leverage my data and I can monetize my data and I control my data. And that it's not the Googles of the world that owns and controls and monetize all of that. And what you're saying is that you're building a technology to help leverage that. So to your point regarding the why, for someone that's in a camp in someplace in the world that just went through some tragedy, or someone that's living the Silicon Valley, why is self-sovereign ID so important? And what are some of the prevailing technologies that you're seeing that's being converged to make this concept a reality?
Yeah, I love that. The ideas, the principles of self-sovereign ID, and the concept that I first introduced about 6 years ago at the WEF in Davos, which is self-sovereign AI, that abstraction one level up. If I asked you the question, who owns you, right? You would have a visceral response and reaction to that. That is a provocative question because the answer we like to give is that no one owns us. We own ourselves, if anything. We are grateful to our parents. We are loyal to our partners and friends. We are responsible for our children, but neither do we own them, nor do they own us. And the inconvenient truth, though, is that in the world that we live today, where that life that we live as self-sovereign human beings, owned by nobody, literally every step we take generates a digital footprint today. There isn't a data event that is not generated everywhere we go, everything we do, everyone we're with. And literally a handful of companies, 3 or 4 in Silicon Valley, a few in Seattle, and then a smattering here or there, today are ingesting all of those data events we're generating without our knowledge, without our control, without our say, certainly without our governance or any compensation to us. And they are building digital models of us, right? We've heard multiple terms. We've got the digital twins that deal more with kind of physical structures. We've got avatars and digital representations of us. And they are today interacting. Your digital interpretation in one of these large AI systems is interacting with advertisers, is interacting with businesses. And we have no control over that, right? And so the answer to who owns you is we want it to be you. And we fought the largest war in American history on American soil to never have to answer that question again. And yet the ugly truth is that who owns us in our digital form is not who we want it to be. And so if you think about how we solve for that, we start off with fundamental principles of self-sovereignty, therefore self-sovereign ID. Why is our ID held and owned by a handful of companies? And from that ID, which is where the data is emanating under, why is it going into AI systems that belong to OpenAI or belong to Microsoft or belong to Google and training their systems to create the value that they create, provide the services they provide, and create the income that they generate? Big tech has generated close to the GDP of Germany in income from what raw material? Not cement or iron ore, it's data, right? And so self-sovereignty in data matters incredibly. Now, if you look at the innovation that has come there, Apple, great example of a company that has now put its stake in the ground on privacy. You think privacy, people think Apple, which is kudos to Apple for doing the branding and the work down there. And they've created what they're now calling personal AI, personal intelligence. Again, branding geniuses. They call AI Apple Intelligence. Again, branding genius. And that's all wonderful. Even in this case of personal AI or personal intelligence, who owns that AI? One guess, right? It's Apple. And then we're seeing some of these L1 protocol layers from the blockchain world that are building decentralized AI platforms. Near is a good example. Most of them, and they're wonderful people, and their intention is fantastic. And decentralized networks for AI are great. But again, who owns the data in that network? How is it allocated? Where are the economics of it? Where is the governance of it? And so the reason I introduced the term self-sovereign AI all those years ago, and it really does come down from the reason I mentioned so much of Rashida, the refugee, and Susan, because you have to think from the perspective of the who, what their lives are like, what are the implications of loss of privacy? Can the implication of loss of privacy for Rashida result in a genocidal dictator being able to target her and others in a camp, for example? And that's why self-sovereignty starts to become so critical. So what is self-sovereign AI that's different from personal AI or decentralized AI? If you took a Venn diagram, self-sovereign AI would be personal AI. It's important for it to be the representation of each one of us. It should run on distributed and decentralized compute and storage. Great, decentralized AI. But all of that AI, where it touches my life, that personal AI should belong to me, should run between my control. I should have governance over it. And economics from it have to inure back to me. There might be platform fees, etc., along the way, but the economics belong to me. That is true self-sovereign AI because That is how we operate in the physical world. You own you. The activities you do are in your control. You can be as responsible or irresponsible about them. And when you go and do work, when you provide, whether it is manual or mental labor, when you provide your expertise, that income comes to you, and there might be platform fees and whatever else, and someone might make a lot of money out of that. But the income inures back to you. And so those are the basics of self-sovereign AI. And when we built Rainfall, we were like, we'll put our money where our mouth is. It's the world's first self-sovereign AI platform where the AI not only runs entirely on the user's device, but the governance and the economics entirely belong to the user. So what's really interesting is at the point of downloading the Rainfall app or getting it through we have an SDK version, so you can get it through a partner business, that AI becomes yours from the point that you download it and set up your self-sovereign ID and you start building. Because the outcome of that, to your point, Rohan, is that raw data that we're generating constantly, those data events, every step we take, every breath we take, no one's watching me, right? To flip around that beautiful song. And so basically, you have an abstracted intelligence model that's building about me. Going back a little bit to that idea of AI, centralized AI being the superbrain, 5 competing superbrains trained on 40, 50 years of global north data from people of multiple colors, creating this one beige colored brain that knows so much about so much and enough about each one of us to be bad for privacy, but not be good enough for hyper-personalization, right? And now if it was your own intelligence model that knew everything about you, learned about everything you do, your behaviors, your patterns, your preferences, but abstracted that raw data into intelligence, and that intelligence contained no personally identifiable information, acted as your representative, your agent, and then interacted with other agents, other AIs, including LLMs, and provided them pre-provenance, pre-packaged, privacy-preserving knowledge about my specific needs without them knowing who I am, they can deliver back to me extreme hyper-personalization without the creepy shit. And that's when we start building on principles of self-sovereignty, self-sovereign ID, self-sovereign AI, and from that, all of the benefits that inure back to each one of us. And this is not to take away from the efficacy of the examples we took earlier of how AI is impacting the world. It's actually to add to them, to create more of a sustainable value. Because remember, as we talked about data in the question around privacy, AI will get smarter, better, more effective the more data it has. And so actually, from our lives, if we can provide more data, but done responsibly, packaged into these anonymized blind compute-based models, the LLMs, the GPTs, AI systems of different businesses, health systems will actually have more knowledge and will be able to deliver better output in their centralized models, but integrated beautifully with a responsible, decentralized world that is completely self-sovereign in nature.
Cool. Well,
Yeah,
we're getting towards the end of an hour, so
yeah, we
Sure.
are. I just want to capitalize on some of what you said. I mean, I like what you had to say because I actually have some of the same trains of thought. And we all like it when we all like it when we're thinking something and someone agrees with us, right? I'm like, wow, like that really resonates with me. When I kind of think of it is almost the healthcare system, right? It's like we don't own our data. The insurance companies do. The people that service our physical and mental welfare, they own our data. It's like you ever go to a hospital and they have you fill out a form, right? And it's, have you ever had any of these? Have you ever done this? Blah, blah, blah. Have you ever smoked? How much you drink? Et cetera, et cetera. And so they want all this information on you. And it's, dude, I'm just going in for kidney stones. Like, why do you need to know if I broke my arm? So I feel like if we owned our own personal data profiles, and I feel like there's ways to do that. You've got some very great approaches. I feel like there's a lot of different ways to make people feel like they own their own data. And I really hate it because, say, for example, like the insurance industry, at least in America, the healthcare industry, it does not favor the consumer. So they know that if you have a predisposition to an illness, or they can charge you more money. It's like the sicker you are, the more they can charge you. And it's a racket. But if we can put that power back into the consumer's hands, I think that's a game changer. And we make it a bidding war for the insurance and the healthcare companies, not for the consumers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to that point, like those are really good examples of places where it's such an easy fit that actually benefits both parties, because in most cases, businesses that get all of this data don't need 90% of it. So if you look at principles of zero knowledge proofs, I love that simple example, right? To the people who are not tech industry folk, you walk to a bar in the US, the bouncer needs to ask you for ID, right? When he looks at your ID, he doesn't need to know whether you're a donor. He doesn't even need to see your name. And actually, he doesn't need to see your birth date either or address. He just needs that driver's license to go green in the context of what the bar needs, which is you need to be above 21, right? The other 99% of data was utterly useless to him. And so, yeah, it was this privacy nightmare, but also he didn't need it. And maybe he didn't even want it and doesn't want the liability of having seen that or owned it. And businesses have that challenge. We're working on a really cool use case in Switzerland where a health insurer can now get patterns of people's lives, especially when they're starting to go and maybe do trials at gyms. And they want to incentivize that behavior by saying, hey, we'll pay for your gym membership. Because guess what? Prevention is much cheaper than that person then going in and needing treatment for things that could have been prevented by just being healthier, by being fitter. You take a simple example of, let's say you go in and you use Apple Pay at a cafe. What does the issuer know about what you just did? They know that you spent $12 at 2 p.m. at this vendor, right? That is what they know. What they don't know is that you and I went in together without knowing who I am or needing to know who I am. They don't know that we got double shot espressos and that after that, we do this on Monday and Friday. And after that, we go to the gym. But because we don't pay at the gym every day, they don't know that we did that. And that after the gym, we go and get vegan protein smoothies because I have a dairy allergy, again, without knowing who I am. And I treat for the protein smoothies, so they don't know that transaction happened because I use a different issuer. And so they don't have a good understanding of you. That hyper personalization for you without creepy stuff can happen in such a beautiful way when we apply these tenets of self-sovereign AI, of this intelligence that can be delivered. And we can do it in a way that is anonymized. We can do it in a way that is real time. And in all of this, you and I should be compensated because the intelligence that was generated to make the business learn better about us, upsell us, cross-sell us, should inure to our benefit as income as well. And so these are not utopian principles. We're obviously rolling this out. But to your point of healthcare, financial services, these are just concrete examples of where we can interplay and integrate self-sovereign AI for consumers with the deep benefit in real time to businesses.
100%. Yeah. Great points. I loved having this show with you. I really enjoyed it with you and Rohan. We talked about some really interesting and provocative, intriguing things, very informative. I think our users will very much enjoy it. With all that being said, time really isn't on our side. We're nearing the hour here. I think we can begin to wrap things up perhaps. But before we end things, just if you have any closing thoughts, Emmy, and then if you just want to leave us off with how, if you would like people to get a hold of you, how they may be able to get a hold of you, and then we can close out and say goodbye to everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Just thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and it's just lovely to speak to a peer group that thinks in big, long-term mindsets. And when you apply that lens of a 10-year vision, it's so invigorating. So I'm full of gratitude for both of you and obviously the work you're doing and the conversations we're having. I'm a big fan of philosophy, and there's two quotes I'd love to share that are my favorites. We're at this inflection moment, I feel, where we've reached that interesting time where, like I said earlier, the school of public opinion and regulatory frameworks are converging around some of these important issues with AI. And Buckminster Fuller said it beautifully when he said, "We are called to be the architects of the future, not its victims." And such a great opportunity for us to, in all of the different ways that we can, be the architects of that long-term responsible future. Because at the end of the day, and this is a quote by one of my favorite philosophers, Ramdas, at the end of the day, we're just walking each other home. And it really inspires how I think about that why and the who with everything that I do. And I feel so much resonance with both of you. And I would love to continue the conversation if people want to get in touch. I'm at Amito, Amitto, on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And if you go to rainfall.one, so it's just rainfall, like rain falling, and then .one, and you can learn more about Rainfall. And then people want to start earning from their self-sovereign AI already. Rainfall is in beta, and you just go to rainfall.one/beta, and you can go in there and download, and it's on test flight, but you can download and start creating your self-sovereign IDs and start earning for your data already. We already have people around the world that are earning for their data. And Rainfall on Twitter is just rainfall_ONE. So yeah, please give us a follow. And we put out a lot of thoughtful educational content on a regular basis as well.
Wonderful. I will certainly do that. And I hope our listeners do. I hope everyone took notes, and particularly on Amit and his background and Rainfall. I think it's tremendous, because I think it's tremendous what you're building. Amit, without further ado, I want to thank you for showing up and having this conversation with us, taking the time to do that, especially on election day. And Rohan, thank you as my co-host as well. To all our listeners, if you would like to be a guest on our podcast here, Explainable AI, you could reach me, Paul Anthony Claxton, on LinkedIn, or Rohan Hall on LinkedIn, and in my website, paulclaxton.io, as well as Rohan's website. So without further ado, Rohan, do you have anything else before we?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, Amit, for coming on. We're both coming from similar places in the blockchain world, and privacy and self-sovereignty and decentralization, and it's great to see how you're putting that together in your Rainfall product. So, and I definitely believe that there's a need for this, and that the future will be self-sovereignty in the different combination of these emerging technologies. So I think that's really cool. Great conversation. Really enjoyed it. And anyone that would like to reach out to me, just rohanhall.com or on LinkedIn. And thanks again, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.